In this exercise, we will practice the basic concatenation operations in pandas. We're going to start with this dataset, and this dataset, which comes from the CSV file, contains some company information for companies in the technology sectors across different countries. So we have the company name, the country, the market capitalization, the cash and revenue in millions of dollars. Now, obviously, this dataset is a bit old, is a bit dated. Now, what we're going to do with this dataset, we're going to artificially split this dataset, and the exercise is to basically put these pieces back again to reassemble the data from these pieces. So, first we're going to split it across the rows. So what I'm doing here, I'm splitting it to two pieces. The first piece contains rows from the first row to 10, so the first 10 rows, and all of the columns. And the second piece contains the remaining rows from 10 to the end, and this dataset actually has 20 rows, so we will get another 10 rows, and all of the columns. So if you take a look at data 1, you'll see that data 1 is 10 rows from the original dataset, and data 2 is another 10 rows. We just split it row-wise. Now the question is to put it back to reassemble the data. So there are two ways to doing it, either using concat or append. Because this operation, the two data we want to concatenate the two data sets row-wise, the easiest way to do it is using append, because append will basically just stick data 2 after data 1, and we get the original data set back again. The alternative here is to call the function concat. Function concat we call on the package, and we need to provide a list of the data sets, the data frames we want to concat. In this case, it's data 1 and data 2. By default, the concatenation is going to be across the row axis, so I don't need to specify the axis parameter. But if I want to be very specific, I can say axis is 0 or axis is rows, because I'm concatenating across the row axis. Next, I'm resplitting data again to two data frames, but I'm kind of splitting the data column-wise. So data 1 now contains all of the rows, but only the first two columns, and data 2 contains all of the rows and the remaining columns from column 2 to the end, and this data frame has 5 columns, so we get 3 columns in data 2. Let's take a look at data 1 now. Data 1 contains all of the rows, but 2 columns, company and country, but data 2 contains 20 rows, 3 columns, market cap, cash, and revenue. Because we are now combining the datas column-wise, we need to use concat. Append doesn't help us here. So we need to call the function concat, and we need to provide the list of the data frames for concatenating. Here, it's important to provide the axis parameter. If we don't provide the axis, it's going to concatenate row-wise, and that's not what we want to do. Like, look, if we do concat row-wise, you can see it stick the second data frame after the first one, and we get null values where the column axis did not align. So that's not what we want to do. We want to stick them column-wise. So we want to tell it that axis is 1 or axis is column. And now we stick the second data frame after the first data frame on the column axis, and the row index aligned perfectly because we took it from the same data frame initially, so we get back the original data frame. In this last exercise, I'm splitting the data to 4 pieces. First 10 rows, first 2 columns, last 10 rows, last 3 columns, first 10 rows, last 3 columns, and last 10 rows, last 3 columns, data 1 to data 4. And the question is to reassemble the data from the 4 data frames. So we have now 2 options here. Either we assemble data 1 and data 2 and data 3 and data 4, and then reassemble the result from these 2 assemblies together, or we reassemble data 1 and data 3 and data 2 and data 4, and then we reassemble the remaining the resulting 2 data frames. Again, it's probably easier to assemble data 1 and data 2 because we are going to concatenate on the row axis. So we can simply say data2.append data1.append data2, and that's going to give us the first two columns. And if we assemble, let's call this one X, and if we do Y, data2 data3.append data4, Y in this case is the remaining last three columns. So then the next step is to do pd concat X and Y. Obviously in this case the axis should be 1 over columns, and we get back the original data frame. The other alternative is to assemble data 1 and data 3 first. But if we do this, then the X now would be the result of concatenation. Because we are assembling on the columns, I need to use the concat function and put my axis to B1. So that's going to give us the first 10 rows, all of the columns. And I'm going to do the same for Y, and Y is going to be the concatenation of data 2 and data 4. And you can see Y is going to give us the last 10 rows, all of the columns. Next, once we're done, we can simply append Y to X, and that's going to give us the original data frame. So this exercise is just kind of practicing the basic operations. Of course, it's an artificial exercise because we broke the data set. In the next exercise, we will have a data set which is splitted and we need to assemble it back again.